I'm serious, Michael, Emily said, gripping my hands tightly in the middle of the crowded airport terminal. I'll be right here when you come back. I forced a smile and said, you better be. I'm counting on it. She laughed softly and replied, you sound like you don't trust me. I shook my head. I trust you more than anyone. She leaned closer and pressed her forehead against mine. Then stop worrying. I answered, I'm not worried, even though it was a lie and we both knew it. The loudspeaker announced another boarding call and my stomach tightened. Emily squeezed my fingers and said, hey, look at me. I met her eyes. You're going to come back safe, she said, and when you do, we're going to take that road trip you keep talking about. California. The coast. All of it. I nodded. Deal. She smiled. And I'll still be in New York waiting for you. I asked quietly, promise? She answered without hesitation, I promise. I pulled her into a hug. I love you. She whispered back, I love you more. When I finally walked toward the gate, I looked back once. Emily was still standing there, smiling and waving, and I held on to that image during the entire flight across the world. The first thing I remember about the desert was the heat. It felt like the air itself was burning. Welcome to paradise, a voice said beside me. I turned and saw Sergeant Jake Collins grinning. You're Turner, right? He asked. Michael Turner, I replied. He shook my hand firmly. Jake Collins. Stick with me and you might survive this place. I raised an eyebrow. That encouraging, huh? Jake shrugged. Depends. You married? I nodded. Yeah. He whistled softly. Long-distance marriage during deployment? That's rough. I answered quickly, she'll be fine. Jake chuckled. You say that now. I frowned slightly. She promised she'd wait. He smirked. Man, they all say that. I shook my head. Emily isn't like that. Jake raised his hands. Hey, I'm not judging. I'm just saying the distance messes with people. I replied firmly, well, not us. He studied me for a moment before nodding slowly. All right, Turner. I hope you're right. The days quickly turned into a routine of patrols, heat, and exhaustion, but every night I waited for one thing, Emily's call. One evening my phone buzzed while I sat outside the barracks. Hey, I answered. Hey yourself, Emily said, and just hearing her voice made the desert feel a little less empty. How's New York? I asked. Loud. Busy. Exactly the same, she replied. Still hate the subway? I asked with a smile. Always, she laughed. I leaned against the wall. What did you do today? She sighed. Work was boring, but Ryan stopped by earlier. I smiled. Ryan Parker? Yeah. What did he want? He helped me fix the kitchen sink, she said. You know how useless I am with tools. I laughed. Ryan always liked pretending he's a handyman. She teased back, hey, it worked. I said, well, tell him I owe him a beer. She replied, I will. We talked for almost an hour that night about small things, groceries, her job, the apartment, normal life. Before hanging up, she said softly, I miss you. I answered quietly, I miss you too. She whispered, come back soon. I promised, I will. She ended the call with, I'm waiting for you. I said, I know. Weeks passed, and Jake started noticing how I always stepped outside with my phone at the same time every evening. One night he laughed and said, let me guess, wife calling? I nodded. Yeah. He shook his head. Man, you're disciplined. I smiled slightly. She's the best thing in my life. Jake leaned against the railing and said thoughtfully, my ex used to say the same thing. I looked at him. Used to. He shrugged. Yeah. I asked, what happened? He answered bluntly, deployment happened. I shook my head slowly. Emily's different. Jake gave a small smile. You really believe that? I replied without hesitation, I know it. He nodded quietly. I hope she proves me wrong. A few days later, Emily called again and her voice sounded excited. Guess what? She said. I laughed. What? Ryan invited me to a rooftop party next week. I raised an eyebrow. Oh yeah. She explained, just a bunch of friends from college. I nodded even though she couldn't see me. Sounds fun. She hesitated for a second. You don't mind? I asked, why would I mind? She replied, I don't know. Some guys get weird about stuff like that. I shrugged. Ryan's my friend. You should go. She sounded relieved. Okay. Then her voice softened. I wish you were here. I sighed quietly. Me too. She said gently, when you get back, we'll go to parties together again. I smiled. Deal. One night, months into deployment, Jake and I sat on a sandbag wall watching the dark horizon. The desert was silent except for the wind. You ever think about home? He asked. All the time, I replied. What do you miss the most? He asked. I didn't hesitate. Emily. Jake looked up at the stars above us. You're lucky to have someone waiting for you. I nodded quietly. Yeah. Later that night I walked a little farther away from camp. The sky above the desert stretched forever, cold stars filling the darkness. I stared up at them and whispered to myself, she's waiting for me. The wind moved softly through the sand as I closed my eyes and held on to the memory of Emily standing in that airport, smiling and promising, and in that moment, standing alone in the desert, I believed her with my whole heart. The first time something felt wrong, Michael Turner stared at the phone screen for almost 5 minutes before finally putting the device away. Emily Turner's message had arrived late. Not hours late, just late enough to feel strange. The text read, busy day. Talk tomorrow? Michael whispered to the empty barracks. That never used to happen. He leaned back against the metal wall and stared at the ceiling fan spinning slowly above him. The next evening he sat outside the barracks waiting for the usual call, but the phone stayed silent. Sergeant Jake Collins walked over carrying 2 bottles of warm soda and tossed one toward him. Michael Turner waiting for the nightly love speech again? Jake asked. Michael caught the bottle and shrugged. Emily Turner usually calls around this time. Jake sat beside him on a wooden crate and repeated slowly, usually. Michael frowned. What does that mean? Jake took a sip of soda. Michael Turner deployed for months now. Distance does weird things. Michael shook his head. Not Emily Turner. Jake smirked. Michael Turner defending Emily Turner like a knight. Michael replied firmly, because Emily Turner deserves that. Jake raised both hands. All right. Sergeant Jake Collins not starting a war tonight. Suddenly the phone buzzed and Michael grabbed it immediately. Emily Turner's voice filled the speaker. Hey. Michael smiled automatically. Emily Turner finally remembered Michael Turner exists. Emily laughed softly. Work ran late. Everything okay? He asked. Yeah. Just tired. Michael leaned back against the wall. How was New York today? Busy. Loud. Same as always. Michael waited for the usual energy in her voice, but something felt different. Emily sounded distracted. He asked carefully, Emily Turner all right? Of course, she replied quickly. Michael hesitated before speaking again. Emily Turner's voice sounds far away. Emily sighed lightly. Just a long day. Michael asked casually, Ryan Parker still fixing things around the apartment? Ryan Parker helped again today actually, Emily said. Michael chuckled. Ryan Parker turning into full-time handyman. Emily laughed briefly but the laugh faded quickly. Then she added, Emily Turner might go out with Ryan Parker and some friends tomorrow. Michael replied, sounds fun. Emily asked quietly, you sure Michael Turner okay with that? Michael laughed softly. Ryan Parker practically family. Good, Emily said quietly. The call ended earlier than usual. Michael stared at the phone for a moment. Jake glanced over. Short call tonight, he said. Emily Turner tired? Michael replied. Jake nodded slowly. Michael Turner sure? Michael frowned. Sergeant Jake Collins sounding suspicious again. Jake shrugged. Sergeant Jake Collins just watching patterns. What patterns? Michael asked. Jake leaned forward. Calls getting shorter. Messages slower. Tone different. Michael shook his head again. Emily Turner just stressed. Jake sighed. Michael Turner really trusts Emily Turner. Michael answered without hesitation, more than anyone. Jake nodded but said nothing more. 2 days later the patrol went badly. The desert heat felt heavier than usual and Michael missed a radio call during the mission briefing. Captain David Morgan stared directly at him. Michael Turner listening or sleeping? Michael straightened immediately. Listening, Captain David Morgan. Captain Morgan stepped closer. Focus matters out here. Michael nodded firmly. Understood. Later that evening Michael sat alone cleaning his rifle when a calm voice spoke nearby. Michael Turner mined somewhere else today. He looked up and saw Layla Hassan standing near a supply crate holding a folder. Layla Hassan new translator, she said with a small polite smile. Michael nodded. Michael Turner heard Captain David Morgan mention Layla Hassan earlier. Layla studied his face carefully. Someone far away distracting Michael Turner. Michael gave a tired laugh. Michael Turner that obvious? Layla nodded slightly. eyes always looking somewhere else. Michael sighed. Emily Turner back in New York. Layla tilted her head thoughtfully. Emily Turner important to Michael Turner. Very. Layla spoke gently. Distance makes hearts louder sometimes. Michael looked down at the rifle parts. Michael Turner hoping distance not changing Emily Turner. Layla did not answer immediately. After a moment she simply said quietly, hope powerful thing. Later that night Michael waited again for the call, but the phone stayed silent. Minutes passed before a message appeared. Emily Turner text read, going out tonight with friends. Michael replied immediately, call later? The typing bubble appeared, then disappeared. Finally another message arrived. Maybe? Late night. Michael stared at the screen. Jake walked over again. Michael Turner still waiting? Michael showed him the message. Jake read it quietly. Out with friends? Michael nodded slowly. Jake spoke carefully. Ryan Parker part of those friends? Probably. Jake rubbed his chin. Michael Turner okay with that? Michael replied, why wouldn't Michael Turner be? Jake sighed. Because distance changes people. Michael looked away toward the dark desert horizon. The wind pushed sand softly across the ground. He said quietly, Emily Turner promised. Jake responded gently, promises made close together feel stronger than promises made across oceans. Michael stayed silent. Hours passed and the phone never rang. He stared at the dark screen and for the first time since leaving New York, a quiet thought appeared. The thought felt small but heavy. Michael whispered into the empty desert night, something feels different. The patrol that evening felt longer than usual. Sand stuck to my boots, my shoulders ached from the weight of my gear, and all I wanted was 10 quiet minutes and a decent internet signal. Jake walked beside me as we returned to base and said, Michael Turner finally getting phone signal tonight? I nodded and replied, Michael Turner hoping so. Jake chuckled. Emily Turner keeping Michael Turner sane out here. I forced a small smile. Emily Turner usually does. Back in the barracks yard I sat on a crate and opened my phone. 1 weak bar of signal appeared. Finally, I muttered. Messages began loading slowly, work emails, random updates, then a message from Chloe Bennett appeared. I frowned because Chloe Bennett rarely contacted me. I opened the message and read, Michael? I think you need to know something. My stomach tightened immediately. What does that mean? I whispered. Jake noticed my expression and asked, everything all right? Not sure yet, I replied. Below Chloe Bennett's message was a photo. I hesitated before opening it and when the picture finally loaded my chest tightened. Emily Turner sat in a Manhattan bar. Ryan Parker sat beside Emily Turner, too close. Ryan Parker leaned toward Emily Turner. Emily Turner smiled. Their shoulders touched. Jake leaned closer and asked, what happened? I turned the screen toward him. Jake studied the photo quietly and said carefully, could be nothing. I nodded quickly. Exactly. Friends sit together like that. Jake looked at me again and asked, Michael Turner believing that? I swallowed and answered quietly, Michael Turner wants to. Jake didn't argue and simply nodded. I stared at the photo again. Ryan Parker's hand rested near Emily Turner's arm. The angle looked wrong, the closeness looked wrong, but my mind kept repeating the same sentence. Ryan Parker friend, Ryan Parker trustworthy. Jake stood up slowly and said, Michael Turner talk to Emily Turner. I will, I replied. Jake added gently, Michael Turner deserve answers. I nodded. Later that night the phone rang and Emily Turner's name appeared on the screen. I answered immediately. Hey. Emily Turner's voice sounded normal. Hi Michael Turner. I asked, how was the night? She replied, busy, loud. Chloe Bennett dragged Emily Turner out earlier. My eyes moved back to the photo and I asked carefully, Ryan Parker there too? A small pause followed before Emily answered, yeah. I cleared my throat. Michael Turner saw something tonight. What does Michael Turner mean? She asked. Chloe Bennett sent Michael Turner a photo. Silence followed. Then Emily's tone changed. What photo? The bar. Another pause. Then Emily's voice sharpened. Why is Chloe Bennett sending Michael Turner pictures? I spoke slowly. Michael Turner just asking. Emily snapped. Michael Turner spying now? Michael Turner not spying. Then why questioning Emily Turner like a detective? I just want to understand. Emily sighed loudly. Emily Turner allowed to have friends. I know that. Ryan Parker friend too. I know that. Then why this interrogation? I rubbed my forehead. Michael Turner just felt something looked strange. Emily's voice grew colder. Michael Turner thousands of miles away and suddenly suspicious? That's not what Michael Turner said. Michael Turner clearly doesn't trust Emily Turner. That's not true. Then dropped the subject. I hesitated before speaking again. Emily Turner looked close with Ryan Parker. Emily immediately responded, "Oh my God." "What?" I asked. "Michael Turner really jealous of Ryan Parker?" "Michael Turner not jealous." "Then stop acting like this. I'm just asking questions." "Well, stop." Her voice turned sharp. Michael Turner left Emily Turner alone in New York for months. That was work. Emily Turner still living life. I understand that. Then stop controlling Emily Turner. I felt something twist inside my chest. I'm not controlling anything. Michael Turner definitely trying. Emily Turner misunderstanding. Emily sighed again. Emily Turner tired. I asked quietly, "So Emily Turner hanging up?" "Yes." Emily Turner, wait. The line went dead. I stared at the silent phone. Jake walked over slowly and asked, "How did that go?" I gave a hollow laugh. "Not great." Jake sat beside me on the sandbags and asked quietly, "What happened?" I showed him the phone. Jake looked at the call log and said, "Emily Turner defensive?" "Very," I replied. Jake exhaled slowly. "Michael Turner talk about the photo?" "Yes." "And?" "Emily Turner angry." Jake nodded. Anger sometimes means guilt. I looked toward the dark desert horizon as the wind moved softly across the sand. For a long moment neither of us spoke. Jake finally asked, "Michael Turner still think nothing wrong?" I didn't answer immediately. The photo flashed again in my mind, Emily Turner leaning toward Ryan Parker, the way Emily Turner smiled, too comfortable and too close. My chest felt tight as I finally said quietly, "I think something's wrong back home." Jake sighed and looked at the stars above the base before saying softly, "Michael Turner probably already knows that." The next message from Chloe Bennett arrived 2 nights later. I was sitting outside the barracks, staring at the same cracked wooden table where I checked my phone every night when my phone buzzed. I opened the message immediately. "Michael. Chloe Bennett, sorry for not saying everything earlier." I frowned and typed back slowly, "What does Chloe Bennett mean?" 3 dots appeared on the screen, then another message arrived. "Michael Turner deserves the truth." My stomach tightened and I wrote again, "What truth?" Another pause followed before Chloe Bennett replied, "Michael Turner needs to see something." A file appeared below the message, a video. My hands suddenly felt heavy. Jake sat nearby cleaning his rifle and glanced over. "Bad news?" he asked. "I don't know yet," I muttered. Jake said quietly, "Michael Turner should probably watch it." I tapped the video and the screen flickered to life. Music blasted through the phone speakers, lights flashed, and the scene showed a rooftop party in Manhattan. People were dancing, laughing, and drinking as the camera moved through the crowd. Then I saw Emily Turner standing near the railing holding a drink. Ryan Parker stood beside Emily Turner, too close again. Jake leaned slightly toward the screen and said, "Same guy from the photo." I whispered, "Ryan Parker." The video continued. Ryan Parker said something that made Emily Turner laugh, and Emily Turner leaned closer as Ryan Parker placed a hand on Emily Turner's waist. My chest tightened. Jake said quietly, "Michael Turner maybe stop watching." I shook my head. "I need to see this." Then it happened. Ryan Parker leaned forward and Emily Turner didn't pull away. Emily Turner kissed Ryan Parker. The video ended. The phone slipped slightly in my hand and for a moment I couldn't breathe. Jake spoke carefully, "Michael Turner?" I said quietly, "I saw it." Jake rubbed the back of his neck. "Michael Turner want to talk about it?" I shook my head slowly. "No." Jake stood up and placed a hand on my shoulder. "Michael Turner not alone here." Then Jake walked back toward the barracks while I sat there staring at the dark phone screen. 10 minutes passed before I opened my contacts and Emily Turner's name stared back at me. My thumb hovered over the call button and finally I pressed it. The phone rang once, twice, then Emily Turner answered. "Michael." My voice came out colder than I expected. Michael Turner saw the video. Silence followed before Emily Turner sighed softly. "So Chloe Bennett finally sent it?" I asked quietly, "You knew Chloe Bennett might tell me?" Emily Turner replied, "Chloe Bennett has always been dramatic." I said slowly, Emily Turner not denying it. Another pause followed before Emily Turner spoke calmly. "No," the word felt like a bullet. I clenched my jaw and said, "So Emily Turner kissed Ryan Parker?" Yes, Emily Turner answered, and the honesty somehow made it worse. Why? I asked. Emily Turner exhaled slowly. Because Emily Turner was lonely. My chest tightened again. Lonely? Michael Turner left, Emily Turner replied. Michael Turner deployed for work. You chose the desert. I chose responsibility. Emily Turner's voice hardened. Emily Turner chose not to sit alone every night waiting. I whispered, Emily Turner promised. Emily Turner replied coldly, people say things in airports. I said quietly, that promise meant everything to Michael Turner. Emily Turner answered, well, that promise wasn't realistic. My hand tightened around the phone. So Ryan Parker replaced Michael Turner? Emily Turner replied, Ryan Parker didn't replace anyone. Then what is Ryan Parker? I asked. Emily Turner paused before answering bluntly, Ryan Parker is here. The words cut deeper than the kiss. I stared into the darkness outside the barracks and said quietly, so Emily Turner done with Michael Turner? Emily Turner didn't answer immediately and finally said softly, Michael Turner thousands of miles away. That's not an answer. It's reality. I felt something inside me crack. Emily Turner could have told Michael Turner. And say what? She asked. That Emily Turner was falling for Michael Turner, best friend? Silence filled the line before Emily Turner spoke again, softer now. Michael Turner deserves someone present. I replied, and Emily Turner deserves loyalty. Neither of us spoke for several seconds before I finally said quietly, Michael Turner understands. Emily Turner sounded surprised. You do? Yes. What does that mean? She asked. It means the truth finally clear. Emily Turner hesitated. Michael. But I ended the call. The next morning during the mission briefing I barely heard anything Captain David Morgan said. Maps were spread across the table and radio chatter filled the room, but my mind stayed in Manhattan. Captain Morgan stopped talking suddenly and said, Michael Turner. I looked up. Yes, sir. Captain Morgan studied my face. Stay after the meeting. The briefing ended quickly and the other soldiers left. Captain Morgan closed the door and crossed the room slowly. Michael Turner distracted. I replied, I'm fine. Captain Morgan shook his head. Michael Turner not convincing anyone. I sighed. Something happened back home. Captain Morgan folded his arms. Girlfriend? Wife? I answered. Captain Morgan nodded slowly and said firmly, whatever problem waiting in New York will still be there when deployment ends. I know. He continued, but if Michael Turner loses focus here, Michael Turner might not live long enough to deal with it. The words hit hard. I understand. Captain Morgan looked directly into my eyes and said, keep your head in this mission. Yes, sir. Later that evening I sat alone behind the supply tent as the desert wind moved slowly across the sand. Layla Hassan approached quietly and sat beside me without speaking. After a moment Layla Hassan said softly, Michael Turner heart heavy today. I forced a small smile. Michael Turner that obvious? Layla Hassan nodded gently. Pain easy to see. I stared down at the sand and said quietly, Emily Turner kissed someone else. Layla Hassan didn't react with shock and instead asked calmly, does Emily Turner still belong in Michael Turner heart? I replied, I don't know. Layla Hassan looked toward the fading sunset and said, sometimes the hardest battles are not fought with weapons. I nodded slowly. Layla Hassan talking about the heart. Yes, Layla Hassan replied. For a long moment we both sat silently as the sky turned dark above the desert. Finally I whispered the truth out loud, my life might never be the same. Layla Hassan placed a hand gently on my shoulder and said quietly, then Michael Turner must decide what kind of life comes next. The days after the truth came out felt heavier than the desert heat. Every memory of Emily played in my head like a broken recording. Emily laughing in our kitchen, Emily hugging me at the airport, Emily promising to wait. Now every memory felt poisoned. Jake noticed immediately, and one evening he dropped onto the crate beside me and said, Michael Turner hasn't spoken more than 5 words all day. I muttered, I'm fine. Jake snorted. Michael Turner terrible liar. I stared at the sand in front of my boots as Jake leaned forward and said, Michael Turner still thinking about Emily Turner. I nodded slowly. Jake shook his head. Michael Turner can't keep bleeding for people who already walked away. I rubbed my face. It's not that simple. Jake replied firmly, it actually is. I looked up and Jake continued, Emily Turner made a choice. Ryan Parker made a choice. Michael Turner now decides what happens next. I exhaled slowly. Part of Michael Turner wants revenge. Jake raised an eyebrow. What kind? I don't know. Something that makes Emily Turner regret everything. Jake leaned back against the wall and said calmly, revenge feels good for 5 minutes. And after that? I asked. Michael Turner still broken. I stayed quiet while Jake looked directly at me and said, don't let Emily Turner and Ryan Parker destroy Michael Turner's life. I frowned. Michael Turner not destroyed. Jake pointed toward my chest. Michael Turner barely sleeping. Michael Turner missing radio calls. Michael Turner staring at phone all night. I didn't argue. Jake softened his voice. That's exactly what they want. I asked quietly, what do you mean? Jake shrugged. If Michael Turner spends the next year angry, Emily Turner still wins. I stared at the ground again as Jake added quietly, don't give Emily Turner that power. Later that night my phone buzzed again with another message from Chloe Bennett. I opened it immediately. Michael. Chloe Bennett should have told Michael Turner earlier. I replied, told me what? 3 dots appeared, then another message arrived. Ryan Parker been pushing Emily Turner into business deals. My stomach tightened. What kind of deals? I typed. With Victor Sterling, Chloe Bennett replied. I frowned. Emily Turner boss? Yes. I typed quickly. What about Victor Sterling? Chloe Bennett answered, Victor Sterling promising big investment returns. I asked, Emily Turner investing money? Ryan Parker convinced Emily Turner to try. I stared at the screen. So Ryan Parker and Emily Turner working together now. Chloe Bennett responded slowly, Ryan Parker pushing hard. For money? I asked. For power. I shook my head. Emily Turner always hated risky investments. Chloe Bennett replied, Ryan Parker good at convincing people. A cold feeling spread through my chest. So Ryan Parker not just friend. No, I typed again. What else? Chloe Bennett paused for almost a minute before replying, Ryan Parker telling Emily Turner that Michael Turner might never come back. The words hit like a punch and I whispered quietly, unbelievable. Chloe Bennett added one final message, Michael Turner deserved better. I didn't respond. 2 days later my phone rang again and Sarah Turner's name appeared. I answered immediately. Hey Sarah Turner. Sarah didn't waste time. Michael Turner heard the rumors. I asked, what rumors? Sarah replied, Emily Turner and Ryan Parker. I sighed. So the news reached Chicago. Sarah answered bluntly, half the family already knows. That's great, I muttered. Sarah's voice sharpened. Michael Turner don't sound surprised. I replied quietly, Michael Turner stopped being surprised a while ago. Sarah paused before speaking firmly. Michael Turner listened carefully. I'm listening. Stop thinking about Emily Turner. That's easier said than done. Sarah didn't soften. Michael Turner wasting energy on people who already left. I stayed quiet as Sarah continued, Michael Turner needs to ask one question. What question? I asked. Who does Michael Turner want to become after this? I frowned slightly. What does that mean? Sarah answered, Michael Turner has 2 choices. Go on. Michael Turner can spend years angry. Or, Michael Turner can become stronger. I leaned against the barracks wall while Sarah added, Emily Turner betrayal doesn't define Michael Turner life. I whispered, right now it feels like it does. Sarah's voice softened slightly. That feeling won't last forever. Later that night I walked patrol alone along the outer fence. The desert wind felt cold and my thoughts kept drifting back to Emily, back to Ryan, back to the promises. When the patrol ended I sat on a small rock outside the watchtower and pulled something from my pocket. An old folded letter. My father's handwriting covered the page. My father wrote that letter years before dying and I read the same line again. A man's strength is not measured by betrayal, but by how he rises afterward. I read the sentence 3 times while the desert wind moved quietly across the sand. For the first time in weeks my chest felt lighter. Suddenly Jake's voice came through the radio. Michael Turner still awake? Yeah, I replied. Everything all right? Jake asked. I looked up at the stars above the desert and answered, yes. Jake sounded surprised. That quick? I smiled faintly. Michael Turner figured something out. What's that? Jake asked. I stood up slowly and said, I'm not chasing revenge. Jake paused. Then what? I replied calmly, I'm rebuilding my life. Jake chuckled softly through the radio and said, now that sounds like the Michael Turner I know. Months passed before anything from New York reached me again. By then my routine had changed, patrol, training, sleep, repeat. Jake noticed the difference first. One evening Jake dropped onto the bench beside me while I cleaned my rifle and said, "Michael Turner finally looks human again." I smirked. "Michael Turner always human." Jake shook his head. 3 months ago Michael Turner looked like a ghost. I shrugged slightly. Maybe Michael Turner needed time. Jake nodded. "Whatever Michael Turner doing now, keep doing it." I leaned back against the wall. Jake helped. Jake laughed. "Jake Collins deserves free drinks when deployment ends." I nodded. "Deal." Jake studied my face for a moment before asking, "Michael Turner still thinking about Emily Turner?" I replied calmly, "Not the same way." Jake raised an eyebrow. "What does that mean?" I answered, "Emily Turner part of the past now." Jake smiled slightly. "Good answer." Later that night my phone buzzed while I sat outside the barracks. I checked the screen and saw a message from Chloe Bennett, and I opened it immediately. "Michael." Chloe Bennett heard something strange. I typed back, "What happened?" Chloe Bennett replied quickly, "Ryan Parker pushing Emily Turner deeper into Victor Sterling investments." I frowned slightly and asked, "How deep?" Chloe Bennett responded, "Almost everything Emily Turner saved." My stomach tightened slightly as I read the message. "Emily Turner never liked risky deals," I wrote. Chloe Bennett answered, "Ryan Parker convincing Emily Turner that Victor Sterling empire unstoppable." I stared at the message for a long moment before typing again. "What about Ryan Parker money?" Chloe Bennett replied, "Ryan Parker investing too." I asked, "For profit?" Chloe Bennett answered, "For status." I leaned forward slowly and typed, "What does that mean?" Chloe Bennett replied, "Ryan Parker wants power." The message stayed on the screen while I thought for a moment before asking, "Emily Turner listening to Ryan Parker?" Chloe Bennett answered, "Yes." I asked again, "Emily Turner really believes this?" Chloe Bennett replied simply, "Yes." I sighed quietly before typing another message. "Chloe Bennett still talking to Emily Turner?" Chloe Bennett answered, "Sometimes." I hesitated before asking one more question. "Does Emily Turner mention Michael Turner?" Another pause followed before Chloe Bennett replied, "Emily Turner rarely says the name anymore." That sentence felt strange, not painful, just distant. I typed back, "Thank Chloe Bennett for telling me." Chloe Bennett replied, "Michael Turner deserves the truth." I set the phone down. Jake looked over from the other side of the bench and asked, "More drama from New York?" I shrugged slightly. "Something like that." Jake leaned closer. "What happened now?" I replied calmly, "Ryan Parker convincing Emily Turner to invest everything with Victor Sterling." Jake whistled softly. "Risky." I nodded. "Very." Jake shrugged. "Michael Turner planning to warn Emily Turner?" I shook my head slowly. "No." Jake studied me carefully. "Michael Turner really letting it go?" "Yes." Jake nodded approvingly. "That's growth." A few weeks later the real shock arrived. I had just finished morning training when my phone vibrated again and Sarah Turner's name appeared on the screen. I answered immediately. "Hey Sarah Turner." Sarah's voice sounded urgent. "Michael Turner sitting down?" I frowned slightly. "Should Michael Turner be?" Sarah replied, "Probably." My stomach tightened. "What happened?" Sarah didn't hesitate. "Victor Sterling under federal investigation." I blinked in disbelief. "What?" Sarah continued, "Federal fraud investigation." The words echoed in my mind. "Are you serious?" I asked. Sarah answered, "Completely serious." I walked slowly toward the barracks wall. "What about Emily Turner?" Sarah exhaled softly. "That's the problem." I asked quietly, "Explain." Sarah replied, "Victor Sterling company collapsing fast." I asked again, "And?" Sarah answered, "Anyone invested could lose everything." I felt the weight of those words sink in. "So Ryan Parker and Emily Turner?" Sarah finished the sentence for me. "Both deep in the investment." I asked, "How deep?" Sarah replied, "Very." I leaned my head back against the wall and whispered, "Wow." Sarah asked carefully, "Michael Turner okay?" I answered calmly, "Yes." Sarah sounded surprised. "You sound calm." I replied, "I am calm." Sarah paused before asking, "Michael Turner not angry?" "No, not even a little?" Sarah asked. I looked out toward the desert horizon and answered quietly, "No." Sarah sounded genuinely confused. "Why not?" I replied calmly, "Because Michael Turner warned Emily Turner months ago about risky choices." Sarah said softly, "And?" I answered simply, Emily Turner didn't listen. Sarah nodded slowly through the phone. Fair point. Then Sarah added quietly, Chloe Bennett told Sarah Turner that Ryan Parker borrowed money too. I frowned slightly. Borrowed? Yes. How much? I asked. Sarah replied, enough to ruin Ryan Parker if the company collapses. The desert wind moved slowly across the sand as I stood there thinking. I felt strangely peaceful. Sarah spoke again. Michael Turner thinking something. I answered, yes. Sarah asked, what? I replied quietly, life has a way of balancing things. Sarah laughed softly. Sarah Turner always believed that. Later that evening I sat outside the camp watching the sunset as the sky turned orange above the desert. I reread Sarah's message again. Victor Sterling under investigation, investments collapsing, Ryan Parker drowning in debt, Emily Turner losing everything. Months ago those words would have filled me with anger, but now I just felt quiet. Jake walked over carrying 2 cups of coffee and handed one to me. What's the news tonight? He asked. I replied calmly, Victor Sterling under investigation. Jake nearly dropped the cup. You're kidding. No, Jake stared at me. What about Emily Turner? I answered, Emily Turner invested heavily. Jake shook his head slowly. Wow. I added, and Ryan Parker borrowed money to invest too. Jake sat beside me and asked carefully, Michael Turner feeling vindicated? I thought about the question while the desert wind moved softly across the camp. Finally I answered honestly, no. Jake raised an eyebrow. Not even a little? No. Jake studied my face again and asked, what does Michael Turner feel? I looked toward the fading sunset and answered quietly, peace. Jake smiled. That's better than revenge. I nodded slowly. For the first time since everything happened, I understood something clearly. Sometimes karma doesn't need help. Sometimes life delivers its own justice. And all a man has to do is step aside and watch. The news reached the desert before sunrise. Jake walked into the mess tent holding a tablet and said, Michael Turner needs to see this. I looked up from my coffee cup. What happened? Jake placed the tablet on the table and a news headline filled the screen. Victor Sterling Industries under federal fraud investigation. I leaned closer as Jake crossed his arms and said, looks like the whole empire collapsing. I scrolled through the article slowly, millions lost, executives under investigation, investments frozen. I exhaled quietly. Jake studied my face and asked, Michael Turner thinking about Emily Turner? I answered, yes. Jake nodded slowly and said, Ryan Parker must be panicking right now. I continued reading while the article mentioned investors losing everything. Jake leaned over again and asked, Ryan Parker invested heavily, right? I nodded. Yes. Jake whistled softly. Then Ryan Parker probably finished. I set the tablet down and added, Ryan Parker borrowed money too. Jake raised an eyebrow. How much? Chloe Bennett said a lot. Jake shook his head. That's bad. I stared at the screen again as Victor Sterling's name dominated every headline. Jake sat across from me and asked carefully, Michael Turner feeling good about this? I shook my head. No. Jake looked surprised. Not even a little satisfaction? No. Jake nodded thoughtfully. Maybe that means Michael Turner really moved on. Later that day my phone buzzed again and a message from Chloe Bennett appeared. I opened it immediately. Michael, everything collapsing here. I typed back, what happened? Chloe Bennett replied quickly, Victor Sterling Company frozen by federal investigators. I wrote back, I saw the news. Chloe Bennett continued, Ryan Parker borrowed money everywhere. My stomach tightened slightly and I asked, how bad? Chloe Bennett replied, Ryan Parker drowning in debt. I stared at the message before typing again. What about Emily Turner? Chloe Bennett paused before replying, Emily Turner invested nearly everything. I leaned back in the chair and muttered, so Emily Turner lost it. Chloe Bennett answered, yes. Another message appeared. Emily Turner and Ryan Parker fighting constantly now. I read the line twice and asked, Ryan Parker blaming Emily Turner? Chloe Bennett replied, Ryan Parker blaming everyone. I asked again, and Emily Turner? Chloe Bennett wrote back, Emily Turner blaming Ryan Parker. I shook my head slowly as another message appeared. They're falling apart. I stared at the words quietly before replying, thank Chloe Bennett for telling me. Chloe Bennett responded, you deserve to know. I placed the phone down. Jake walked over again and asked, more updates? Yes, I replied. Jake sat down. What now? I said, Ryan Parker drowning in debt. Jake laughed softly. Karma working fast. I added, and Emily Turner lost almost everything. Jake leaned back and said quietly, "That's rough." I nodded. Yes. Jake looked at me closely and asked, "Michael Turner feeling sorry for Emily Turner?" I thought about the question before answering, yes. Jake frowned slightly. Even after everything? Yes. Jake sighed. Michael Turner too good sometimes. 3 days passed and the headlines kept getting worse. Victor Sterling arrested. Executives under investigation, assets frozen. Ryan Parker's name disappeared from social media. Then one evening my phone buzzed again with a message from Chloe Bennett. Ryan Parker disappeared. I frowned and replied, "What does that mean?" Chloe Bennett answered, "No one knows where Ryan Parker went." I asked, "Running from debt?" Chloe Bennett replied, "Probably." I stared at the message and typed again, "And Emily Turner?" Another pause followed before Chloe Bennett wrote, "Emily Turner alone now." I didn't respond. The next morning the desert sky turned pale orange before sunrise. I stood outside the camp watching the horizon when my phone buzzed again. This time the screen showed multiple missed calls with Emily Turner's name repeated again and again. Then a voicemail notification appeared. My chest tightened slightly. Jake noticed and asked, "That Emily Turner?" I nodded. Yes. Jake stayed quiet for a moment before saying gently, "Michael Turner doesn't have to listen." I replied, "I know." But my finger pressed the play button anyway. Emily Turner's voice filled the speaker, soft and shaking. "Michael. Emily Turner doesn't know where to start." I closed my eyes as Emily Turner continued, "Everything falling apart here." Her voice cracked slightly. "Ryan Parker gone." There was a pause before she continued, "Money gone too." The silence inside the message felt heavy before Emily Turner whispered, "Michael?" Emily Turner made the biggest mistake of life. I stood still while the voicemail ended. Jake waited nearby without speaking as the desert wind moved quietly across the sand. Jake finally asked, "What did Emily Turner say?" I looked out across the endless dunes and replied, "Emily Turner regrets everything." Jake nodded slowly. "And Michael Turner?" I watched the sunrise spread across the desert horizon and whispered quietly, "Some mistakes can't be undone." The day my deployment ended felt strangely quiet. Jake walked beside me toward the transport plane and said, "Michael Turner finally escaping the desert." I smiled slightly. "Feels unreal." Jake stretched his arms and asked, "Michael Turner going back to New York?" I shook my head. "No." Jake looked surprised. "Then where?" I replied, "Chicago." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Sarah Turner Place?" "Yes." Jake nodded slowly. "Good choice." I looked back once at the base behind us. Months ago I arrived there broken, but now I felt different. Jake studied my face and asked, "Michael Turner thinking about Emily Turner?" I answered calmly, "No." Jake smiled. "That's progress." The wind in Chicago felt colder than the desert ever did. Sarah Turner hugged me the moment I stepped through the door and said, "Michael Turner looks healthier." I smiled. "I feel healthier." Sarah pulled back and studied my face. "Michael Turner finally let everything go?" I replied, "Almost." Sarah nodded approvingly. "Good." We sat at the kitchen table drinking coffee. Sarah asked, "Michael Turner planning next step?" I answered, "I want to build something new." Sarah smiled warmly. "That sounds like the brother I remember." Jake called 2 weeks later and I answered immediately. "Jake Collins." Jake laughed through the phone. "Michael Turner missed desert already?" I chuckled. "Not even a little." Jake chuckled again. "Good news then." I asked, "What happened?" Jake hesitated for a moment before saying, "Jake Collins leaving the military." That surprised me. "Seriously?" I asked. Jake replied, "Yes." I asked, "What's the plan?" Jake answered confidently, "Jake Collins thinking business." I leaned back in my chair. "What kind?" Jake said, "Security consulting." I asked, "Jake Collins serious about that?" Jake answered, "Yes." Jake paused before asking, "Michael Turner interested?" I smiled. "Michael Turner already thinking the same thing." Jake laughed loudly. "Then we just started a company." The next months moved quickly. Jake moved to Chicago and we worked long days building the business together. One afternoon Jake walked into the office holding paperwork and said, "Michael Turner, look at this." I asked, "What is it?" Jake replied proudly, "Our first real contract." I read the document carefully and then looked up. Jake Collins actually pulled it off. Jake grinned and shook his head. No, Jake pointed at me. We pulled it off. For the first time in years I felt proud of the future instead of afraid of it. 6 months later I heard another familiar voice. Layla called one evening and said, "Michael Turner sound busy." I replied, "Business growing." Layla laughed softly. "That is good." I asked, "What about Layla Hassan?" Layla answered, "Layla Hassan visiting America soon." I smiled slightly. "Really?" Layla replied, "Yes." I asked, "Chicago?" Layla answered, "Yes." I smiled again. "Michael Turner will show Layla Hassan the city." Layla replied warmly, "Layla Hassan looking forward to that." Life slowly became peaceful and the past stopped chasing me. Then one evening my phone buzzed while I stood outside near Lake Michigan as the cold wind moved across the water. I checked the screen and saw Emily Turner's name appear again. Not a call, just a message. I stared at the name for several seconds before opening it. The message was short, "I wish I had waited." The words sat on the screen quietly. Months ago those words would have shattered me, but now they only felt distant. Jake stepped beside me holding 2 cups of coffee and asked, "Bad news?" I shook my head. "No." Jake glanced at the phone. "Emily Turner?" "Yes." Jake waited a moment before asking, "What did Emily Turner say?" I showed him the message. Jake read it slowly and then asked, "Michael Turner answering?" I looked back at the water and said, "No." Jake nodded slightly. "Probably smart." I read the message one more time and then deleted it. Jake watched quietly before saying softly, "Michael Turner finally free." I nodded slowly. "Yes." Later that night I walked alone along the lake. The city lights reflected across the dark water while the cold wind pushed against my jacket. I thought about the man who left New York months earlier. That man believed promises without question. That man trusted everyone. That man feared losing everything. I whispered quietly, "Michael Turner was blind." The wind carried the words away, but something else replaced that old version of me, stronger, calmer, wiser. Jake's voice echoed in my memory, "Don't let them destroy Michael Turner life." Sarah's voice followed, "Decide who Michael Turner becomes after this." Even my father's letter returned to my mind, "A man's strength is not measured by betrayal, but by how he rises afterward." I looked across the endless water as the past felt far away now. I breathed in the cold air and whispered into the wind, "I survived." The words felt simple but powerful because this time my life belonged only to me, and for the first time in years the future felt wide open.